All right. We still have a few people coming in, so we'll give it another couple of seconds. I'm so glad that everyone is joining us today for Martin Luther King Day and what promises to be an inspiring conversation. My name is Angela Fobbs. I'm the chair of the Global Black Caucus for Democrats Abroad. And I just want to welcome everybody to the event. This year is the 38th year since the federal holiday for Martin Luther King was first observed. And this year is also would have been Dr. King's 95th birthday if he hadn't been killed at age 39 on April 4th in 1968. Our fight for civil rights and voting rights continues. So I implore you all to use those rights because many people fought and died for our rights to vote. Overseas voters can go to votefromabroad.org and request their absentee ballot. We have more power than we know, and we must defend our democracy from the forces that want to delete the past 2 centuries of progress. For sure, your vote counts this year. And if at any time during the event, if you have a question for our speaker, please add your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as we go along. And we'll try to answer as many as possible. So with that, I am very happy to introduce Harcourt Klinefelter. He was the Assistant Director of Public Relations for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he is also a Democrats Abroad member living in the Netherlands. He was responsible for recording Dr. King's speeches and sermons and sending them to the media and making them suitable for radio programs. Thank you so much for joining us today, Harky.
Thank you, Angela. I want to thank the Democrats abroad for all the help they've given me in the past, because every 4 years I have to register to vote again. And that is sometimes a time-consuming process with long telephone calls to the registrar's offices in America. But it's nothing compared to the struggle that the people went through during the time of Dr. King's campaign to get the right and practice in the South for Afro-Americans. And then it began in Selma, Alabama, where I began. So I want to thank Democrats abroad for all their help. And I want to say how important it is that at this moment in history, which is crucial, every vote counts.
Yes, every vote counts, and all you have to do is click a link and fill out a form. You don't have to march or be beaten or hurt, and that's all you have to do. So we're going to begin our program with a video that was created about Harky's life with Martin Luther King. It was done by a Dutch television station, and the name of the video is called Sunday Morning Blues.
In what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
I remember one day I was in the middle of the summer burning all the old things I could never use again, and I'd forgotten that day that was the day that the March on Washington took place. And a number of students that had gone to the March on Washington said what a fantastic speech that Martin Luther King had made.
I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
There was a white minister who'd gone down for the demonstrations, and he had gone into a black cafe, and when he came out, he was clubbed in the head by some racist and lay in a coma in the hospital. And for some reason, that caught my attention. And a couple of days later, he died, and there was a memorial service for him. So I went to the service, and there was a minister, and he said that there had been a crucifixion here in Selma, and we needed people for a social resurrection. And I knew it was my turn to go. So the next day, I took 2 other students, and we drove 1,000 kilometers to Selma. And I had brought with me a Philips portable tape recorder. And I got into Selma. And then I went down to the police barricades. They called it the Berlin Wall. And on the one side were the police, heavily armed with clubs, machine guns, about 10 of them, looking very scared. And on the other side of the barricade where I was standing were little children, old men. They were testifying. They were singing spirituals and freedom songs. We did march, and we were stopped. And there were people who wanted to force their way through, but the leader of the demonstration says, no, we're not going to force our way through. We're not going to do it with words or even with our spirit. And they got down on their knees and made a row and said, may God bless you, or we wish you a good day. And then they would get up and walk back, and the next row would get down and say, may God bless you, or something. And this made an extremely deep impression on me.
This prayer we ask in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen.
I was the only person there that in the organization that had any kind of electronic and most all technical ability. So I ended up working, doing that in the summer. And at the end of the summer, they asked me to join the staff. So I became the assistant director of public relations, and I was responsible for making all of the tape recordings of Dr. King's sermons and speeches. And Mrs. King at one point called the office and asked if I would come and fix the family tape recorder. The house was in the ghetto because he said he wanted to be reminded of for who he worked for every day when he drove to work. So it got late, and she said, well, won't you stay for dinner? And I said, well, I don't want to put you to any work. And she says, no, that's no problem. Martin is always inviting people unexpectedly to come to dinner, so I always have extra food. And so I said, well, if that's no problem, then I'd really love to stay. And Dr. King came in, late as usual, and I said to Dr. King when he came in, I said, I don't feel worthy to sit at the same table with you. And he said, now, Harcourt, you make it necessary for me to make a long sermon about how all people are equal.
Like anybody, I would like to live Long life, longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
My name is Robert Mosley, the producer of this show. At 7:10 this evening, Martin Luther King was shot in Tennessee. Martin Luther King, 20 minutes ago, died.
The following day, after Dr. King was killed, I was in, I think, the back room from the chapel in the theological school, getting my coat. And it was as if I had heard a voice from Dr. King who said, "It's okay." Most of the things that were said in I Have a Dream have come true as far as his own children. So I've been trying the rest of my life to spread the message of nonviolence with the same spirit that was with the mass movement to stop the war in Vietnam, where I did training and sometimes led demonstrations. So that spirit goes on, and the dream will go on. Dr. King had always said, innocent suffering is redemptive, that something good will come out of it. And that is the message of Jesus and the resurrection, whatever that means. That death is not the end. And Dr. King had said that death is not a dead-end street. It's only a bend in a road that we can't see further on.
Wow. Well, I've seen this video several times and I found it very moving each time. Can you tell us, Harky, how did you first meet Dr. King?
I first met Dr. King when a fellow student in Yale Divinity School took me to my first civil rights rally. Homer McCall was a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Dr. King's church. He had studied in Oxford. And we went to Bridgeport, Connecticut for this mass rally, my first mass rally. And there were so many people in the audience, we couldn't get in. And the spirit, particularly with the singing, was much more religious than in a theological school. So we had to stand backstage. And Dr. King came in with an escort of a number of policemen, and he walked right by the most important people the mayor and others, and went straight over to my friend, and he said, "Homer, how are you doing in your study in Greek?" And I was so surprised. Here is a world famous person, and he's more concerned about the parishioner of in his church than he is of the mayor of a large city. And that was my first introduction to Dr. King. And then I heard a warmed up version of I Have a Dream. So that was my first meeting with Dr. King.
Wow. Wow. What was Dr. King like in person when he was out of the spotlight?
And Dr. King was out of the spotlight, just an ordinary person. He saw you not for what you were or what you are now, but what you could be in the future, and tried to inspire you to reach that. He treated the garbage collector the same way he treated the mayor. He was always available after the service to talk to people. So I was just impressed with his personal life as his public life.
How old were you when you met him? There's a picture behind you. How old are you in that picture?
Yeah, when people said, "Is that you?" Then I know I was getting old. No, I was at the time, I was 27.
Yeah, okay. The Selma March is a significant historical event in America, and I would say maybe around the world, focusing on voter suppression, which is still a relevant issue today. You joined King's civil rights movement after Bloody Sunday. Take us back to the moment where you decided to join and the day of your first protest. What was the atmosphere like?
When I when I decided to go to Selma, I prayed all night and took two other students with me and drove all night to Selma. I came into the Brown's Chapel, which was the center of activities. And people were sleeping on the benches. There was paper cups on the floor. And then I went outside on the street. And at the end of the street is the barricades with the police. And on the one side were the police looking very scared. And on the side where I was, there were people singing and testifying. And they sung, "Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on?" Well, I knew which side I was on. And then when Dr. King came into Selma, I went into him and said I had who I was in Yale, and I had information about Homer. So this was the spirit of the march. And then when I had gotten into Selma and went down to the Berlin Wall, that evening we had a nonviolent training, and we used rolled up newspapers as clubs, and then we would have a role play of confrontation with the police. And the first thing that you learn was to keep eye contact. It's very important because you want to let the people know you're a human being and not just an object that has to be moved out of the way. And then we were taught that if you were a club, you should not do what is normal, then you'd have a bunch of broken fingers. But what you should do is this: you protect. Well, I guess I disappeared.
Yeah, you did.
And that protects your temples, which are the most vulnerable place, and the back of your neck, which is also very vulnerable. And the top of your head, that's not so important. You get knocked out, but you survive. And then if you couldn't keep standing and fell to the ground, and you need to roll up in a ball and try to protect yourself. And then we had a church service, and we would sing, God will take care of you. No matter what happens, God will take care of you. Well, that's nice to sing in the safety of a church with stained glass windows. It's another thing when you're going to march the next day.
Yeah, okay, I found the recording, so we're gonna hear a recording. There's no video with this, everybody, so just please listen closely.
I'm from Yale Divinity School, Harcourt Klinefelter. I'd like to bring good news about Homer McCraw.
Homer, yes. He's doing all right.
Yeah, he got out of the hospital about 3 weeks ago. We saw him for an hour, and then he was on the way home to his folks by the bus. So he's doing okay now. And
Well, I'm happy to hear that. You know, I feel such a sense of guilt because Homer is a very dear friend, and I have been so busy that I didn't have time and a chance to really drop by to see him. I had hoped to do that, but I've been out of the country once or twice and other things, and I just haven't been in touch with him for several weeks. So I'm glad to know he's doing well.
Well, he expects to return in the fall to Divinity School.
Oh, good.
Oh, that is something I don't think I've ever heard Martin Luther King say before. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's rather
When he's
amazing.
saying I've been out of the country a couple of times, one of those was to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. So this lets you see the concern again of Dr. King for people as people and not just the masses.
Yeah, you recorded Dr. King's speeches and sermons to transform them into radio programs, which might be the equivalent of a podcast today for broadcast radio and TV stations. How did you manage this without the internet?
Not alone was not only not the internet, it meant that we would have to take the tape recorder, go to a telephone cell. I guess there's some places in the world where they still have telephone cells, put money into the telephone, and then we would take apart the telephone and take the microphone out of the telephone, and then we would connect with wires from the tape recorder to the telephone and send the actualities over the telephone station. And in those days, the photographer would take pictures, but it would take a couple of hours to develop the pictures at best. So the world has changed. And now everybody, the recordings were on, were mono, and now people have cell phones and they can make recordings with high resolution video and send it instantly over the whole world. So this is what has happened in a half a century.
Yeah, things have really, really changed. It's really changed a lot. Probably be a lot easier to do the technical bits now, but maybe more difficult to have protest like there were in the 60s. Just so everybody knows, Harcourt has written a book. It's called The Life of the Peace Apostle, Globalizing the Dream of Dr. Martin Luther King. In that book, you discuss the protest and the recordings you made with your tape recorder. During a specific time frame, you refer to it as the Berlin Wall. What did the protesters say during your interviews?
Now, the Berlin Wall, that's the barricade, as it was said earlier, the singing, the testifying, saying how important what was going on was and what it meant to them in their lives. In those days, if you were an Afro-American and you wanted to register to vote, then your name would come on, if you got that far, in the on the public register, and there would be questions, and you had to prove that you could read or write. And if you were a white person who put a cross by your name, that was good. And if you were a professor of English in the state university, could write the whole Constitution without a mistake, that was never good enough. And if you were registered and got that far, then if you were lucky, you were on the street with all your belongings the next day. And if you were not so lucky, you and your family might be hanging from a tree somewhere. So that was the atmosphere. But in spite of that, there was a joy. And after the march was over, we made a recording of one of the people who had marched the whole way. And we have that recording from this girl. And when I say marched the whole way, in the middle of the territory that was protected by the National Guard, the whole march had protection. There was Lowndes County, where the most lynchings were. In America, there's been almost 1,000 lynchings, but never a conviction. And in Lowndes County, that's where the most lynchings were. And only 300 hand people could walk through Lowndes County. The rest were shipped by buses further on. So after the march was over, we interviewed a few of the marchers that had marched all the way. And this one interview from this young girl is something that I think is what is most important, and that was the spirit. It wasn't all about blood and pain. The Holland American line had a slogan earlier: getting there is half the fun. Well, that's the side that unfortunately doesn't get out. And so I would like to play this recording of this young girl.
All right, we're gonna play the video from that. It's the pictures don't necessarily coordinate with the words that she's saying, but they are related. And then after that, we'll answer some of the questions in the Q&A.
Southern Negroes that join the movement live in constant danger, but without fear. This typical young girl that marched the entire 54 miles has no doubts about the necessity and validity of that great march.
I didn't go prepared to march. I had signed to go all the way, but I wasn't sure they were going to be able to take me because I heard that they had took all the names. And I didn't take anything but my coat. So that night I had to sleep cold, and the heaters went out, and the wind and everything was real terrible. And so I stayed woke all night that night by the little gas burner they had outside. And the next day we marched and marched. It rained. That's the day we really had to walk hard. All that rain, I didn't get a cold. The next day, which was Tuesday, we had to.
Lowndes County.
Yeah, that's the day you had to pick them up and put them down. This and everything. Oh boy, I'm telling you, I said, I know they're gonna try something if they have to wait till we come back. And I said, Lord, I said, you know, I know these people in Lowndes County. And I said, all I want you to do is take care of me and give me more strength to walk faster through this stretch. I prayed that prayer all the way through there. I hadn't had any water all day because if we stopped, we had to run to catch up, and I didn't want to have to catch up, And I wanted to be credited for walking the whole way, so I just did without water. So I didn't have any water in 2 days, and my tongue swelled up. The next day, the nurse was out there that waited on me, and she came, and she said, "Little girl, are you going to march today?" I said, "I sure am." She said, "All those blisters," I said, "they're not hurting. I only hurt when I stopped."
And you stayed out there all the time?
All the time. Every camp we were in, I slept in it.
How'd you feel when you marched up the street to the Capitol?
My feet were hurting so bad. And when I had the flag carrying one of the biggest one out there, I felt so happy I didn't know what to do. Dr. King, I think he's the greatest thing that happened. Really, it's just like heaven. And I'll go anywhere he tells me to go, really. With blisters, sore head, anything. I couldn't hardly breathe while I was out there. I fainted, I passed out and everything, but I ended up going on ahead.
What do you feel the march has accomplished?
We're 50 years from where we started when this voter registration started. Really, in Selma, 50 years. Because people can walk around and they're not afraid. If someone get killed, that still doesn't stop them. But I didn't walk 50 miles in vain.
Do you feel that people will be afraid to register to vote?
Well, I don't think they should be afraid because, after all, they've been killing Negroes all the time. Nothing been done about it. They do find out who killed them now.
And this has been a big improvement.
If you excuse me for the slang, it's just a nigger dead.
How do you feel about the people that came down to Selma from the north?
Oh, I think they're so sweet and they try to be so helpful. And they're really a big help. Just having them here to participate for security is enough for me.
Did it change your feelings towards white people, knowing the people from the
I never hated the white people. It's some good in everybody. And, if they were a Christian, they couldn't hurt anyone. Because, if you had a heart and you believe in God, you can also believe in a lot of other things that you don't see, too. And I don't judge a person by the color of his skin.
Do you think this is going to change the white community's attitude?
Well, I don't think it would happen very fast. It's becoming to happen very slow, but it will be sure. Well, for one reason, they're afraid they had a hold over us so long. They just feel like it really belonged to them and them only. So that's the problem, really. They think they're giving up their freedom, the white man's way of living. That's what it is.
What do you feel will happen now here in Selma?
Well, only thing I can say that the Negro have to keep going on. Because I know these people can't always stay down here with us, but I believe there always will be some coming all the time. Well, I can't speak for many people. I can only speak for myself. I'm not afraid. I have to die one day. I should die for a purpose rather than nothing. And I think this is a good reason for that.
At one time or another, in one way or another, all of us have said that something is worth dying for. It is not likely that we said it with the calm but complete conviction of this girl. For the third time in less than a month, she was on her way to a civil rights memorial service. Because of our apathy, self-concern, or because we have been too busy, she may have to pay a high price for the simple human rights that belong to every American. There is no non-action. To stand aside or turn away is to swing a club or fire a gun. Her people are weary of injustice, weary of dying, weary of waiting.
What y'all want? What do you want?
Wow. That is an amazing interview that you did. Do you see anything different about what's happening now to what happened then in the United States?
Dr. King said that freedom is a constant struggle. Progress is not linear, an escalator that goes automatically up. It's more like the goals and the waves. And the tide comes in and comes out. If you throw a pebble into a small pond, the waves go out to the shores and they've reached the shore at a different time and a different place. So you can go to the past and go to East Europe and see how people lived in Western Europe 100 years ago. You can go to Egypt and see in the shadow of the pyramids how people lived in the time of Moses. And you can go to Scandinavia and see how people were living in the Netherlands over 100 years from now. So what is the big difference now is during the Selma March in those periods, then it was the local politicians that used the hate language. It was the governor that used the language of racism. And now, what is now the situation? It is coming out of the White House. And that's the big difference. The scale is bigger. And the stakes are bigger because what happened is something that is now on the worldwide scale. So if we want to stop all the hate, discrimination, and misuse of people, we have to raise our voices. And like Rosa Parks, we need to stand up and take our stand. And one of the ways we can help is to use our vote. So we can be thankful at this point. We don't have to pay the high price that girl had in her time. So in any case, that's the difference between there and now. But the stakes are the same. So freedom is still a constant struggle.
Yes, it is a constant struggle. And I implore everyone that if you haven't requested your absentee ballot yet, please go ahead and do so. For people who live overseas, you can request your absentee ballot at votefromabroad.org. If you're seeing this and you're in the United States, you can go to iwillvote.com and register or verify that you're still registered, because voter suppression is still an issue in America. Let's take some questions from the Q&A. We've got a nice row of questions coming up. Our first question is from Cuthbert, and he would like to know if you were ever arrested or beaten by the police during a demonstration with MLK.
Fortunately, I was never arrested or beaten by the police, because my job was to get the news out. And if I got arrested or beaten and the equipment was damaged, then the world would not have had the message of Dr. King and the army of people like this little girl. And so it was something very difficult, because it was kind of, like the Medal of Honor, the Purple Heart, if you were arrested or you were beaten up. So then it was not white privilege. It was the fact that I could use my whiteness to be able to get the news out. And that was my job. I have been in some very dangerous situations. I have risked my life almost every time you marched. you never knew if you're going to come back alive. So I have been jailed in other situations for people's rights at a later time. So in any case, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Carl. He asks, how was the atmosphere at the Lincoln Memorial with all those people and there was no violence?
Well, as I had said, I was not at the March on Washington. So I can say you can only see that from the newsreel pictures and so forth. But I'm assuming it was the same spirit I'd seen elsewhere, where we had the mass meetings for justice and for the right to vote.
We have a question from Heather. She says, thank you so much, Pastor Klinefelter, for bearing witness. Do you still consider that truth is marching on? From your experience, how do you suggest people resist despair, especially after such a setback as the assassination of their loved ones? And finally, did you know our dear friend Chuck Drew at SNCC? And can you share any memory of him if you do remember him?
What was the person's name?
Chuck McDrew, rather, sorry.
I do. No, I didn't know everybody in SNCC, so I can't share any memories of him. The as you saw in the documentary that we showed in the beginning, it was Dr. King's faith that innocence suffering was redemptive, and that truthful triumph. That, as he often said, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. And so truth has a way of coming through the cracks in the pavement like grass growing. So even though it's a constant struggle and there are disappointment messages, in the end, we shall overcome, black and white together, all nationalities, all faiths, all together will someday be able to sing, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Keep that in your heart and you'll never walk alone.
Yeah, I will try to keep that in my heart for sure. But sometimes it's very hard. It's very hard. Here's a question from Bruce. What might Dr. King say about the reparative justice movement today?
The reparative justice movement for the evils that began with slavery and continued through segregation and is still going on is something that is important. There have been attempts to try to repair the damage that this has been done. And so if we are to be able to do more than just say, oh, how bad was slavery, how bad was segregation, then it seems only right that attempts are made to try to change the situation in such a way that these will never happen again.
We have a question from Linda. What do you think the biggest challenge is? What do you think is the biggest challenge America faces today?
My my predecessor in the adult education school in Holland always said that a dictatorship is the opposite of democracy. But the biggest threat to democracy is when people give up on the democratic ideal. So one of the greatest challenges in America is this challenge of people who have given up on the democratic way of making progress and have given up in the faith of being able to change for better with a vote. And that is, in fact, one of the all greatest challenges, not only for America, but over the whole world.
That is so true. We have a question from Kelly. She wants to know what what is the most horrific thing you saw during these marches?
Yeah. And we went into Philadelphia, Mississippi. That was where, in 1964, 3 civil rights workers were murdered, Shorners, Goodman, and Swaney. And on the Mississippi March Against Fear in 1966, we went into this town where these murders had taken place with about maybe 50, 70 people at the most. We came in, we were surrounded by an angry mob with clubs and pitchforks and so forth. And we went to the courthouse, and on the way, the one person came, attacked the cameraman, threw him to the ground, and Dr. King said to the policeman, "Sir, I want to bring your attention to the fact that this cameraman has been injured." And he said, "Well, I didn't see anything," which was an invitation to do what you want. We got to the courthouse. We were able to speak, and to my surprise, everybody was silent when Dr. King spoke. And when he finished, all hell broke loose. And people started shouting, and then we heard bang, bang, bang. We didn't know if it were shots or whether it was fireworks, or the fireworks to be able to fire real bullets. And Dr. Ralph Abernathy, Dr. King's assistant, said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Now I want everybody to say, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And we got up and we started to march away. And the screams of "kill them, kill them." And one of the cherry bombs, fireworks that'll blow off your hand if it goes off, and it came against this girl's leg, and she started screaming. And if people had panicked, I wouldn't be here today. So we surrounded her and started shouting, "Freedom now." And the march walked off. And as it walked off, people said, "Goodbye," not "we'll see you later." And suddenly we were alone, and an old man had an epileptic fit and laid on the ground. And there was a white nurse. She went over to him. I went over, and I could turn my tape recorder on and use it as a public address system. And I said, "Is there a doctor here?" And the crowd said, "Why don't you ask for Dr. King?" And at one point, somebody had a knife at her throat. And we were surrounded. And I thought, well, this is the end. And then I looked up, being surrounded, and I saw something, and it was a pickup truck driven by two black policemen that they had hired for the day to make an impression on television. And they tried to drive through the crowd like the Red Sea. And they really didn't want to stop, but they stopped next to us. And we had to drag the girl into the pickup truck as well as the unconscious man. And with that, one of these cherry bombs came into the truck and landed right in front of the unconscious person's eyes. And I thought, it's his eyes or my hand. And then I used my head and I stood on it with my boots. I lost my soul from my shoe, but I kept my soul. And we were able to drive out and join the march. Now that had a happy ending, but if it didn't, I would still do the same because I knew, because we had done this, the rest, including Dr. King, would have escaped. So that was one of the most violent incidents I have seen. And again, this is the spirit. And because by helping the injured person, not fighting back, we would throw our bodies over somebody who was injured instead of fighting back. And that is the key, because it is the love not only of your friends, but of your enemies. Because Dr. King said, love is the most powerful thing in the universe. It's more powerful than an atomic bomb. An atomic bomb can only destroy. Only love can change an enemy into a friend.
Wow, that is a harrowing story. I'm glad that you and everyone survived. We've got a few more questions. This question is from Art. Dr. King was not only an advocate for justice in the US, but also involved with working for peace around the world, particularly in the Vietnam War. Can you speak a little about this?
Yeah, Dr. King was different from other civil rights leaders in that he saw the struggle for ending segregation in a wider perspective. He saw a trinity of racism, poverty, and militarism. And he said these are all interrelated. Now, Dr. King realized that the struggle was a world struggle. He spoke out against the war in Vietnam. He said that with the money we're spending in Vietnam, we could give everybody a guaranteed annual wage, not a minimum wage, and guaranteed annual wage, what we call a base income. And so this interrelationship led him to have the campaign for ending poverty, the Poor People's Campaign, to try to get a base income from everybody instead of spending money on weapons. Now at this moment in history, we're fighting wars in Russia and the Ukraine, in Israel and Palestine. Wars are very difficult to stop, but are much easier to prevent. And we're spending billions and billions of dollars for weapons to try to stop and to try to protect people. But the reality is that it is much better to spend that money to prevent wars. And most of the attempts to prevent wars in the future are done on a voluntary basis with people's pennies. So if we can change a mentality of death, because there's an old saying, there are no winners in war. It's not true. There are winners. The first place, the arms trade. They'll sell weapons to both sides in the conflict, to gangsters and policemen alike, just to make money. And the other people that are making money from the wars are the makers of coffins and funeral directors. And we need to change this and go back to the idea of beating our shields into pruning shares and our spears into pruning hooks. And that is what we need to do for the future. So let's hope that in the future we will spend more money for all those things that will prevent the evils that we see, for education, for peace and justice, and to end hate, discrimination, and to find another way, to learn to live together as brothers and sisters. Otherwise, as Dr. King said, we will perish as fools.
Wow, that is a very poignant statement. And I think that's a good place for us to end. I'm sorry if I didn't get a chance to ask all the questions in the Q&A. If you'd like to learn more about Harcourt's life, you can get a copy of his book, which I've put in the chat, and you can also visit his website where you can, if you want to contact him, there's a contact information on that, also on that website. I will once again just implore everyone to please request your absentee ballot this year and to vote. And right after this event, if you need any help, there is a live Zoom help going on, which I also put into the chat. It's really important that everyone vote, and not for Republicans either, or third parties. Thank you so much, Harky. It's been amazing to share this time with you.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Yeah.
And let's go out and vote.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and we'll see you at the next event.